Hey, y'all. Welcome. Birds are singing, wind's blowing, sun's still shining just a little bit. And today we're going to talk about how God, through Jesus, makes peace and how God invites us, that's you and me, together to become communities of peace.
Come, Holy Spirit, renew the face of the earth. Set your people free. Come, Holy Spirit, renew your image in us. Heal our humanity.
Today we're looking in the letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2. And the writer there, Paul, is doing some theological reflection, some great theology really about the meaning of the cross. And I think the theological reflection that takes place here is so important for us because I want you to notice it's not like Paul is trying to figure out how God solved a puzzle, worked a secret code to find a way to get us to heaven. That's not the conclusion that Paul draws about what God was up to in Jesus. The conclusion that Paul draws is for us right here, right now. And it directly affects the kinds of community that we're called to participate in, that we're called to be as human beings. It's about here. It's about now. It's a lot about earth, heaven too, but it's about what's happening right in front of us. And so Paul's main theme here in Ephesians 2, he puts very succinctly in this powerful statement, Christ is our peace. Christ is our peace. Now, let's take a few moments and let's unpack what that really means. Because the way in which Jesus brings peace, the way in which God is at work in Jesus to bring peace to all of us is something that we can learn something from, because it's not just that Jesus is our peace and God has done this for us, but precisely because of God's grace, because God has done this for us in Jesus, God's calling us to participate in that peacemaking, in the kinds of relationships that we have. Dr. King said that peace, and I think this is a great biblical definition of peace. Dr. King said peace isn't just the absence of tension, but it is the presence of justice, right? So peace isn't just, chilling where everything's fine and nobody's bothering you. That's great. But that isn't biblical peace. Biblical peace is the presence of justice. Biblical peace is when things are right, when things are as they should be. So Paul is saying that Jesus has become for us the focal point of our well-being, the focal point of our wholeness. In Jesus, God has realigned and renewed and made right all human relationships. Now that's our hope and our high calling. So how does God make this peace in Jesus? Well, Paul puts a lot of emphasis that Jesus has done this in his own body. Jesus has done this in his own flesh. Jesus has done this in his own person. That Jesus has taken upon himself the hostility that is in this world between human beings. Jesus has taken upon himself the division that exists between human beings. Paul says at one point, Jesus has broken down the wall. Our God is a God who breaks down walls, not a God who builds walls. And so Jesus is making peace and reconciling and bringing human beings together in his own person. Now, we see that supremely in the cross, because what was intended by the powers that be in the cross is not, in fact, what God has wrought through the cross, because God's grace, God's love, God's mercy triumphs far beyond what the powers and the principalities and the systems of this world can even begin to understand. But for us who follow Jesus, for us who have been touched by this grace, and we know that God is up to something good, we need a better understanding. And I want to challenge us today. How is it in our own person? Now, we'll talk about community in just a moment. But how is it that each of us in our own person, in our own bodies, in our enfleshed ways of being in relationship with one another, how is it that we can participate in this peacemaking that God is up to in Jesus Christ? You know, are we breaking down walls? Are we building walls? Are we doing away with the codes and the regulations and the policies and the laws and the decrees that keep us separate? Are we ending the hostility in our own person? Are we the kind of human beings that create a peace within our own person, where we don't allow the polarizations of our age, we don't allow the hatreds and the divisions of our time to live in our hearts, but we found a way through God's grace to end them? That's who we're called to be. And out of that, we're called to live as communities that both empower us to be those kinds of persons, but also that become communities of such welcome and reconciliation that all the old understanding is torn away. Paul says at the end of this, you're being created by God through the Spirit as a dwelling place for God's self. That's who we're called to be, beloved, as children of God. Reconciling communities, welcoming communities, open door communities, communities where the table is spread wide for everyone, communities where hostility comes to die in the power of our hospitality, communities of peace. Beloved, that's who God has called us to be. Let us live into this challenge. Let us live into this hope. Let us do it in our own persons.